Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to week 5 of the Future History Project. And we're continuing to read the robot stories of Isaac Asimov, and we're now in the middle of the Susan Calvin stories. And the first one we'll look at is Galley Slave, which incidentally happens to be the longest of the uh, positronic robot stories. I think Bicentennial Man might be longer, but it's considered a novelette or a novella. So uh, I believe Galley Slave is the longest. It's about 40 pages. I think he said it was about, Asimov said it was like 30,000 words. And we find out that it's set in the year 2034, with most of the events talked about from 2033. So that puts U.S. robots and mechanical men at 52 years old, the same age as Susan Calvin. And it is a courtroom drama for the most part. It is the prosecution is accusing mechanical men, the U.S. robotics and mechanical men, that they regarding one of their robots, Easy, EZ is the designation, and it transpires that in 2033, the U.S. robots and mechanical men had a robot that they wanted to field test. But at this time, we have learned that robots are illegal on Earth in public places. There are exceptions. There are a few loopholes, and when it's on private property. But again, there has to be certain strict regulations and safety measures for the robots. And this robot is taken to Northeastern University, and he is shown to one of the heads of the university, a Professor Goodfellow, and he's showing that Goodfellow is showing that Easy can proofread. He can correct any mistakes in proof copies, or find mistakes, grammatical or factual, in books or the manuscripts, as well as create pamphlets and writings. And they're hesitant, or he's hesitant, Goodfellow's hesitant, but he takes it to their board, and all but one agrees. So it is the majority, so it is near 100%. Say they'll give him a go. And so he's so Easy is fed and given piles of proofs to read and to correct. And there's a sociologist, a Dr. Nienheimer, or Neinheimer, who he was the one that voted against having the robot, but he's spent decades working on a sociology book, and he gives it to Easy to proofread. And his normal proofreader and assistant is sort of blocked out of this and say, well, there's no use. The robot can do this. It's it's pretty clear that he has talent. He's able to do all this, so we'll just leave it at that. And then the book gets published, and a colleague of the professor's calls him up or contacts him and says, well, what are you playing at? Well, why are you doing this? He's like, what? And you find out that there's some errors, and he's there's a number of factual errors that really change the whole thesis of his argument, saying that the police are the real criminals and so forth. And he maintains that it's the robot Easy that changed this. And the reason for that is because the 3 laws of robotics, that he thought that he would be harming a group or humanity by saying bad things about a group of people. So he changed it. But Easy Dr. Calvin has interviewed Easy, and Easy just won't talk. So she's convinced that he's been manipulated. He's been told not to speak because she's aware that orders given to robots, like to say forget something, they may forget everything, and it has to be very quantified, very very detailed of what to forget, or the orders have to be very very detailed, because otherwise the robot may interpret it as an umbrella and do more. So that hasn't been done, but he just won't speak about this. So she's convinced that he's been told not to speak. So Susan Calvin sort of sets up a bit of a trap for Dr. Neinheimer, and she asks him what the situation was and why is this a problem, and he starts saying, it's destroyed his career, and she's saying, well, you're asking for $750,000, but if your career is destroyed, and he says, well, for all history now, he's going to be viewed as this and viewed badly. And at this point, they did get special dispensation for Easy to come into the courtroom and listen to this. And then Easy stands up and speaks, and he says, it was me who changed everything with the it was me that made the changes. And then the professor bursts out, no, you're not supposed to speak about it, and so the cat's out of the bag. It's a bit contrived, but it sort of works because the whole problem of this was, how of giving robots orders, and they have to be, very detailed, and that's sort of part of this. But also too, Susan Calvin, she's won the case basically. So she goes to see Neinheimer at the end, and she's going, well, why did you do this? Because, your career, even if you won, your career was still destroyed. And now that you've not won, your career is still destroyed. And he's saying, well, there was something bigger than that, basically, because he felt that the robot would take away, creativity and everything like that. That they would start writing books and everything like that, and doing all this stuff, so there'd be no place for people. So he was on a bit of a crusade for this. And then she's saying, well, was the typewriter that way? Did the typewriter take away? And so it's sort of that's the ending of the story, where yeah, it's like she says, so does a typewriter, so does a printing press. Do you propose to written to hand illumination of manuscripts? And then his answer is, typewriters and printing presses take away some, but your robot would deprive us of all. Your robot takes over the galleys. Soon it or other robots would take over the original writing and searching of the sources and checking and cross-checking of passages, perhaps even the deduction of conclusions. And what would that leave the scholar? One thing only: the barren decisions concerning what orders to give the robot next. So that was his purpose of this. And also too, there's an interesting story of how this story got written, and we go back to 1957. And on April 11th, I got some notes here, so I'm referring to. On April 11th, to be precise, H.L. Horace Gold, the editor of Galaxy, calls Asimov up and says, I need a story now. I need a story. And Asimov says, oh, I'm in the midst of going through my galleys. I can't do this. He says, well, get somebody else to do it. Horace says, and Asimov says, no, I can't get anybody else to do it. I need to do it myself. So he sits back down and starts working on the galleys, and he goes, get somebody else. It's echoing in his head, basically. And he goes, well, what about a robot to do the galleys? And then he starts thinking about it, and then the next day, or no, well, I think that day as well, he sends a note to Horace, says, "I'm on it. I'm gonna write a story." So the next day, he writes he writes Galley Slave, and he calls it Galley Slave, uh, and it was published in December of 1957, um, and and then another interesting thing is in 1963, we speed up to 1963, he gets a letter or some kind of communication from a professor of English at the University of Rhode Island, and with what she believes, I think it was, what she believes is plagiarism in one of her classes. Student had handed in a work, and it turns out to be Galley Slave, word for word, that the student handed in as his own. So this was his sort of first uh, run-in with plagiarism of his work. So now we move on to Little Lost Robot, which is quite interesting. The action is, there's no date again in this one, but the action is on an asteroid, uh, and the research being done there is for hyperspace travel, hyper travel, and the U.S. robots and mechanical men have created some specialized robots called Nesters, NS. And the reason for this, and the reason why Susan Calvin is there, uh, as as well as I think Peter Bogart, another the head of research at U.S. Robots and Mechanical Men, is there as well, because there has been a problem and it could escalate into something massive. Because of the research that they're doing, they have to use gamma radiation there, and every time gamma radiation sort of was let loose a little bit, and the humans were around, the uh, first law, well, basically the three laws of robotics kick in, and the robots go and yank the human out, even though at that point the gamma radiation wasn't high enough to hurt the humans, but they couldn't get around the aspect of the three laws of robotics. So what they did was they changed it. They changed the one law saying they must not harm a human, not that that by inaction allowing a human to get harmed. So they won't do that. So they won't um, go in and save the humans. So that's very fine. But then all of a sudden they're transporting a bunch of robots, and they find that there's one extra, more or less, and there's a robot missing, and so she's there to find, there's like 60 of them there, and they each deny that they're this lost robot, this robot that's gone rogue apparently. So Susan Calvin's, she's interviewing them and doing all this. She knows that one of them is lying, but they can't pinpoint which one is lying. And she realizes that this is very, very important, because this robot could, he thinks he's superior as well to humans. All these nesters do, because they are more knowledgeable in certain mathematics and theories, and they're surprised that humans don't. And because the first law has been curtailed and shortened, that he could actually bring harm to a human, not directly, but by inaction. So, and they don't want that to happen to get out. And she's even calling for them to destroy all the robots. But she gets one very last idea after trying many, many things. But she's found out what has happened through the last researcher, an Arnold Black, who had seen the robot. He was working with him, and he hates the robots because he says they're so condescending. They think they're so smart, and so he started swearing at the robot. And then he told him, "Go get yourself lost." And the robot did exactly that. He was following, and this was a very forceful order. So it is, it's right up there at the top. It's not like, oh, go away for a bit. This is get lost, get yourself lost. So but because of the thing of robots, uh, she tricks the robot. In other words, a little bit, like she uses the logic, because she did the first thing of dropping a heavy weight on a human, and and all the robots would rush to save the human. So it's like, well, all of them did, and even obviously the one that's trying to hide. So that didn't quite work, because he's smart enough to know that he better do this in order to stay hidden. So she does another thing of saying, they're going to put gamma radiation, around that, and you'll die if you go through this, or well, actually, no. First of all, it's an electric fence, and once they touch the electric fence, they'll die, and they're told that the robots are told that. So, but the first law, or the three laws of robotics should still kick in, and then for the robot to try to save. But because these are smart robots, see the liar, not the liar, but the one that's hidden, that's hiding, talks to the other robots and says, basically, then what's the use of us trying to save him? We're not going to be able to save him, and we're dead. And so we won't be able to be around to possibly help another master, and they call them master all the time, the humans. And the robots are referred to as boy. So it's an interesting thing that Asimov has put in. But anyway, so they all just sit there, and let the human die. And so Susan Calvin interviews them all again, and they basically say the same thing. They all have the same story, that, well, they did talk together, and they realized that they're not going to be able to do anything if they're dead. So they can't save the human. So it's a logical thing of not even trying. So then they do again, the gamma radiation aspect, like she does it again, and she's the subject. Now, because with the gamma radiation is that if there's just a little bit, it doesn't harm the human, and it won't harm the robot. But if it's higher, it'll harm the robot as well as the human. But in the tests before, they would still try to save the human, and their brains would be fried. Well, I mean, in the actual research. So she sets this up and tells the robots, that this is going to be, fatal to them. But they have not been taught certain physics yet, because they haven't been put into. There's so much secrecy that they didn't learn certain things until they were on the job. So these robots don't know that a little bit of gamma radiation is okay, and a lot is bad. So when the gamma radiation, they say the gamma radiation is on, all the robots stay sitting except one, who gets up, and because he realizes that it's not gamma radiation, it is infrared. It's a radiation, but you see, the other robots hadn't been programmed to differentiate between radiation, so they think that they're going to get fried. So they did the same thing as with the electric fence. So she's tricked him a little bit, and then he's fighting his laws of the three laws of robotics, because he was told to hide, and then he's trying to sort of kill her, in a sense, like he gets close enough, but he's fighting it, and then all of a sudden they flood the place quickly with a bit of gamma radiation that fries his brain but doesn't harm uh, Susan Calvin. So they sort of saved the day. The research for the hyperdrive to travel through hyperspace continues on. So, and that one was this was he was still in the army. Asimov was in the army at the time, like he'd been conscripted, and and he was trying to get discharged. And during that time, he went to see Campbell, and he took his father's first time. His father had met John W. Campbell, and Theodore Sturgeon was there that he met, and he had an idea for a little lost robot, and uh, and this was in June. Yes, it was in June 11th that he saw in 1946. But he says, he's got the idea for a little lost robot, but he's gonna have to wait. He can't really write it now until he gets discharged. So he gets discharged, and on September 9th, he sees Campbell again, and he says that he's discussed the story. They're discussing the story again, and Asmo says, well, he's had 2 attempts, and just I can't get it. I can't, it's not clicking. So, but Campbell says, pats him on the back in a sense and says, try again, because maybe the third time lucky in a sense. Those things aren't said, but that's the idea. So he did. He goes back and he tries again. And in 5 days, he writes the story. He takes it to Campbell on the 16th of September, and on the 28th, he got 2 cents a word for it. So he got $200. And it was his first post-army sale, and it appeared in March 1942 in Astounding. Now, the last one that we read, again, these are fairly long stories, is Risk, and that again is back on hyperbase, and Susan Calvin is there again. Now they were testing the hyperdrive. They've got it done, and they're testing the hyperdrive. And first of all, they were sort of sending out mice that, on the journey, but they find out that it was coming back like mince meat. That it wasn't working right, and then all of a sudden they came back alive, but no brains. So they even tried a chimpanzee, and they all, comes back. The chimpanzee was just, brain dead basically, but still alive. And it was like they say it was really hard to watch and to see. So they actually, in the end, killed the chimpanzee. So they got a robot from U.S. Robots and Mechanical Men to do this, and they thought, okay, well, this will work, and then the robot will be able to tell, because he doesn't have a human brain, tell what's going on. So they gave the order to the robot. It's a very basic robot, just to follow these orders. It was to their specifications that it was built to grab the lever, pull it forward firmly was the instructions, and hold it there until he's told that he's gone through hyperspace twice and he can let go. So he does this, and nothing happens. It does. The ship doesn't go. Usually it flickered and then reappeared, and it didn't do that. And they realized it didn't happen. So there's some kind of fault with something, and they determined that it's with the ship. There's a fault with the ship, and but it could at any point pop out and start and go somewhere, but they'll lose everything. They'll lose the ship, like $1 billion. They're concerned of this because it could be like a piece of dust, they say, or just something, a loose connection, and all of a sudden will reconnect and go. But because the time they calculated the point of where it was going to go and the point where it's going to come back, the universe has moved since then. The solar system has moved. The asteroid that it's on has moved. So if it happens and it comes back, they don't know where it's going to come back or where it's going to go. It could appear in the center of a sun, or it could appear in Andromeda galaxy. So they're concerned. So, and Susan Calvin, she can't really quite figure out what's happening here. But her conclusion is then you need to send somebody. You need to send an engineer onto the ship and discover the problem. And they're saying, well, no, because they don't want to send a human, send a robot. And she's saying, no, it has to be a human to do this. she has a little extra reasoning for this that we don't find out till a little later. But she suggests, this Arnold Black, who was in the previous story, who was the one that told the Nestor robot to go get lost. And so he doesn't want to do it, but because it's a semi sort of military base, he's ordered to, so he does this reluctantly. And he hates Susan Calvin. And so he does go, like, obviously he does go, and he's good, check out the ship, and he finds out what is the problem. So he opens up a little relay station and then stomps on something, and it's done, and they're going, oh, what the hell? But it solved the problem. And then he's thinking in his mind, he's got Susan. Because he hates robots and that. So he goes back and he says what the problem was your robot who did this, because he pulled back so hard, because it said firmly, that he pulled back so hard he bent the handle and it didn't engage. So that's what it was. It was the problem with the robot. And I'm going to go public with this. I quit. I'm going to go public with this and tell, and say that, you're willing to sacrifice a human for a robot. The robots were too expensive to sacrifice to do this. And he's all, foaming at the mouth at this. But then Susan Calvin says, well, she did think that it was the robot because it was the only thing that was different, and it starting to take the wind out of his sails for this. And then, but she explains that it was the only one. And then he's saying, well, still, you sent me, and you could have sent the robot. And she's going, well, no, you just clearly said that the robots think that they're better, but they're not better than humans. So how therefore can we have sent a robot to do a job that it wouldn't have been able to do this? I picked you specifically because you were untrustworthy of robots, and then therefore I knew that you would look at the robot as a possibility, and if it was the situation, you would have found it. That's why. So he's deflated completely, and so he goes back to his research. He's pissed off because Susan Calvin has won. But there's a great line in here, because there's the 3 laws of robotics, and actually I think it was in the Little Lost Robot, actually, or maybe somewhere where it talks about. It is actually in Risk, I think. Let me just go back and make sure I'm in the right. Yeah, it is in Risk. And they're talking about Susan Calvin. They're saying, what were her 3 laws? He wondered. Her laws for herself. First law, thou shalt protect the robot with all thy might and all thy heart and all thy soul. Second law, thou shalt hold the interests of U.S. Robots and Mechanical Men Corporation wholly, provided it interfereth not with the first law. Third law, thou shalt give passing consideration to a human being, provided it interfereth not with the first and the second laws. So she's got the reputation clearly of being a robot, basically in human disguise. So this one was these are they're in the order that they were written. I mean, that they sort of appear in the chronology, but they're out of order. Like the first one was written in 1957, but it's pretty clear that it predates Little Lost Robot. But Risk is basically a sequel to Little Lost Robot. And in July 18th, 1954, he began writing the story, and it was the first robot story where a robot does not speak. The robot in here doesn't speak at all. It's the only one, actually. And on August 3rd, he mailed the story to Campbell, and uh, he was accepted on the 13th. He's saying on September 13th, and he got 2 cents a word. So for risk, he got $322.50, and at that point, that made his earnings for 1954 over $10,000 US in 1954. And it appeared in May's issue of Astounding in 1955. So there's the first three, or the first three stories for this week. They were long. I hope that you found them enjoyable. But as I say, these are sort of in pretty good chronological order. There are, issues with it because they are a bit contrived, especially in each story. You get Asimov has to get the three laws of robotics back in the correctly, and it's always going to be contrived because it's like going to be saying, "Oh, remind me what they are," and then da 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 da. It's said, or that it's conversation between two people that already know the three laws of robotics. So you don't need to say it again, or it's said to somebody who asks the question, like it's repeated in the court. So it's like you can make it sound natural, but it's still sort of a bit of contrivance to do this, and also to the solutions to the story and the reasons. I mean, for the action is a bit contrived to a certain extent, but it shows the evolution of robots, and that's the chronology that we have to keep in mind, I think, with this. That even though the stories don't really follow one upon the other chronologically and time wise within the universe, they do, in a sense, show aspects of moving from, a more. Like in Catch That Rabbit, they showed these other robots that were, that were very basic in comparison, and then the robot that went astray, the Speedy robot, was a bit more advanced, and then we get these nesters that are very advanced, and then and all these kind of things, and we learn that they pre-programmed the robots for a certain thing at the beginning, but then they can add information. So they made them. They started making them with Lenny. After that, a little more, not complex so much, but a little more versatile rather than just specific. So they can add stuff to it, and that's what the nesters are. So we got the next level for this, uh, and also too about how you give orders to the robot so he doesn't interpret it, you know, exactly what it is and interpret it correctly, because again, their brains they're smart, but they're not human brain. They can't deduce in some ways, and they are bound by the three laws, so they don't have free will basically at this point. And also too, we learn that they're doing research into hyperspace drive to go faster, to go outside of the galaxy, potentially, because why else would you want something to go very fast? And that also too is the foundation of the foundation, in a sense. And also too is that in Little Lost Robot, that that they're called, the robots call the master all the time, and we had this master slave sort of, or master servant aspect all along, but in this one they kept calling the robots boy. So you can see, and you're showing too the opposition to robots because of their banning of having them on Earth, at least testing, and they have to, the company has to get around this and twist the law a little bit and use the loopholes to do certain things, which can cause problems, which we have seen it has. And there's opposition, obviously, to robots, and that is a huge thing in the story as we go along too. We'll see. I'm not giving any spoilers away of future ones, but it does impact on things, even though Asimov, and I keep saying that he wrote this within that universe, but he didn't have it planned out. So he retrofits stuff, but even though the timeline's not perfect at times, there is a continuity of an evolution, I guess you would say, an evolution of technology and thought, and of human thought and society going towards the foundation, through the empire and everything else in between. And there's also, he does have a few stories in here of computers, and Asimov wrote a lot of other stories about computers. I'm gonna revisit those at a later date, because there's only a few computer stories in here, but he did write about a dozen or more multivac computer stories, and I will be discussing those at a certain point. They're not considered to be part of the future history, but again, if we look at the evolution of technology and the thoughts, they do have their place, even though they're not robots. So we'll leave it there, BookTube, and I'll be back on Thursday with the last two stories. And tomorrow I will continue Isaac Asimov's biography. Any questions, concerns, email me, or put it in the comments below, and what you thought of these stories. I'd love to know. Take care, BookTube.